Recently, I was doing some research on the islands of Corsica and Sardinia to do a video on their genetics, but I found out something almost more interesting. The most famous Frenchman of all time, Napoleon Bonaparte, was entirely Italian. He was only legally French. Barely. And then I realized, as someone who's interested in history, I knew very little about Napoleon's life other than the fact that he was a great conqueror and war leader. I had always been under the impression that Napoleon was French born and bred and was a diehard French nationalist. Napoleon was born on the island of Corsica on August 15th, 1769, just 1 year after the Italian Republic of Genoa sold Corsica to the French. He was born to a family of minor Italian nobility, fully Italian parents with roots in Tuscany and Liguria. Even though Corsica had technically become a French province 1 year before he was born, he was still living in an Italian world. He did not speak a word of French until he was 9 years old. In fact, he spoke Corsican, which is so close to Italian that it's basically a dialect. For much of his early life, Napoleon identified heavily with his Corsican nationality, and he even looked up to political figures like Pasquale Paoli, who was the father and leader of the Corsican nationalist movement, who sought liberation from Italian Genoa and the French. When Napoleon was 9 years old, however, he was sent to military school in Paris, and he started learning French and the ways of the French because Corsica was now a French province. He still felt ties to his Corsican identity, so when he was a teenager and graduated from this military school, he joined Paoli's efforts in liberating Corsica from the French, but Paoli accused him of being too pro-France. He still wanted Corsican liberation, but now after all of his time spent in Paris, Paoli felt he didn't hate the French as much as he needed to be a nationalist revolutionary. This would lead to them having a falling out and Napoleon's family being ran out of Corsica. From this point on, Napoleon's connections to his Corsican roots began to diminish, and he even ended up changing his last name to sound more French rather than Italian. Napoleon would continue to reinvent himself as a French Republican and prove himself in the military campaign after campaign. It was by this point in time that the French Revolution was starting to heat up. Napoleon had realized that he was a great leader, and France itself was a vehicle for his success. After returning home from a military campaign in Egypt in 1799, Napoleon overthrew the French Directory through a staged coup and elected himself as first consul. And if you know anything about Roman history, first consul becomes emperor pretty easily. 5 years later in 1804, he had claimed himself consul for life and became emperor of the French. Before being overthrown and exiled, Napoleon did conquer almost all of Western Europe, which of course included Corsica, which if you think about it, was kind of his goal from the beginning. Napoleon was just an Italian kid who made his dreams into a reality.